So tomorrow my wife has work and I'm kind of dressed up in a nice shirt this morning, so I figure I'll continue on with some additional devotional messages. And I kind of keep track. I keep a folder. It's a running pile of thoughts. And when the opportunity comes, sometimes I record more than one a day. But this is one of those days. So I'm working my way through Mark, and something really stood out to me. I went for a run the other day. I'm listening to a series, a documentary, like a 2-hour documentary on the biblical gospel. And they're speaking pretty harshly about the prosperity gospel. So I just felt I had to turn it off. It infuriates me so much. Like, I've got to do a message on this just for my sake. And I know this is a point of contention in Christianity, and we see people on both extremes that are pretty vibrant about what they believe. But I want to share with you. So prosperity gospel would be categorized by those on the far side as basically preaching that Jesus is the key to financial prosperity, health, wealth, and prosperity. So there's on one side they're saying, that's ridiculous, and it's making prosperity and money a god, and Jesus is your personal genie. But since I've navigated both of these worlds for many years, I go over to the other side, and I see a passion, I see a level of faith, I see a vitality that I don't see on the conservative, scripture, the conservative side. I kind of see the Pharisees, it's sad to say, on the theologically conservative side, elements of the Pharisees, attacking the amazing ministry of a lot of Pentecostal, Word of Faith, charismatic. But when I look at both sides, I see weaknesses in both. So just want to share with you just a little brief devotional in preparation. I'm storing up some information for a message to come. Listen to a lot of teaching when it comes to if we sow into the kingdom, we will reap. We reap what we sow. I believe that's a biblical principle, and there's a lot on the word of faith movement, and praying for people, for healing. Do I believe that God heals? Of course he does. Yes. I mean, that's undeniable. Is it the biblical record of healing is undeniable. Jesus healed every single person who ever came to him. The question is really asked, and this would be a good leading question for some healthy tension. Does Jesus want people healthy? Is it Jesus' will for you to be healed and to be prosperous and rich? Now, here's how I'd answer that question. Yes. Like, oh my goodness, how is that possible? Like, now think about this. Let's just look at the will of God in heaven. Is there any sickness in heaven? No. So it's God's will that everyone, God's health is God's will. Is there any suffering, or is there any poor in heaven? No, of course not. Just the richness. I mean, describe it as the streets are lined with gold. So richness and health are both aspects of the world to come. So that's very clear to me that that's God's will. Now, here's the question that they're really asking. Is that God's will here on earth in this era? So when we look at Scripture, I see general principles that support that line of thinking. And that, of course, is what many on one side will emphasize at the exclusion of other principles. So I do see truth in that, and God does heal, and he does prosper people. But we can't hold to those truths at the exclusion of others. Now, let me share the other side. In Mark chapter 8, verse 31, it says that Jesus began to Jesus began to teach, and he said, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed after 3 days and rise again." So Jesus says here, this is what he's predicting for his earthly life: suffering, rejection, and death. Suffering, rejection, and death. And when we read about Brother Yun over in China, who was a house church leader, he had a 5-word slogan for his followers: sacrifice, abandonment, suffering, poverty, and death. So we have 2 competing principles, because right after Jesus shares this in Mark chapter 8, he says, "Whoever wants to follow me must deny themselves, pick up the cross," which was an instrument of torture and crucifixion. If you want to save your life, you must lose your life. So the greatest principle in operation here in this era is one of sacrifice, suffering, and death. And if you look at the disciples, did they experience healing? Of course they did. Did they experience, maybe in seasons, the prosperity, God showing up as a result of their faith to do something extraordinary? Yes, of course. But what was their ultimate demise? Death, suffering, persecution, sacrifice. And so we see 2 principles. One belongs, do you remember how when Jesus came, they expected him to be a king, conquering king, but he came as a suffering servant. Same principle. Both are true about Jesus. Both are completely true. However, in this case, there are 2 truths. Both are completely true, but one is more of a heavenly principle, while one is more of an earthly principle. Here on this earth, we are promised suffering, persecution, difficulties. We don't come to Christ because of what we can get from him, though Christ in his goodness and in his grace may bless us. But that's not the reason why we come. And if he blesses us, and if he upholds some of his principles, like I believe in tithing, I believe in giving generously, and God, as a steward of God's funds, he may give me more if I prove myself to be a good steward of his funds. I believe in all that. But there is that emphasis is more of a heavenly principle of what one day will become true permanently in its fulfillment. Where the earthly principle I see should be properly emphasized here and now to a greater degree. And so that's what I'm encouraging you to think about, and looking forward to preaching a message in more detail here in a few weeks to come. Okay? God bless you, and hopefully you can wrestle with these thoughts until we meet next. Bye.